What conditions is TMS FDA cleared to treat, and what does the data say about its effectiveness?
These are all great questions again. And I think so. FDA, just to give a little more context, the FDA will clear certain TMS systems for certain conditions. And what that allows the companies to do sales and marketing for those indications. FDA cleared for major depressive disorder in adults. Mm-hmm. Also, FDA cleared, the only system that's FDA cleared for major depression and anxiety, mm-hmm. right? We know that most people aren't just depressed. A lot of us have comorbid anxiety. So that was the second indication. And then a third indication recently added was late life depression, right? So late life depression is when depression hits us when we're in our 50s and older.
Right.
Okay?
What are the safety profiles of TMS versus ketamine, and how do you address concerns patients may have about either treatment? Welcome to I Love Being Sober, the podcast where we explore the latest innovations, techniques, and strategies for living a fulfilling and healthy life in recovery. Today, we have a truly special guest, Dr. Richard Bermudez, the National Medical Director at BrainsWay and a trailblazer in the field of Transcranial Magnetic Stimulation, or TMS. Dr. Bermudez has dedicated his career to advancing mental health treatments and improving patient outcomes. In this episode, we'll discuss the science behind TMS, its transformative impact on mental health care, and how it's reshaping treatment options for conditions like depression, anxiety, and beyond. Whether you're a healthcare provider, a mental health advocate, or someone curious about innovative therapies, this conversation will leave you inspired and informed. So let's dive in. Dr. Bermudez, welcome to the show. I'm so glad to have you here.
Thanks, Tim. I really appreciate it. And good afternoon to you. And really looking forward to this opportunity to talk about TMS and the latest and greatest.
Yes, awesome. So we offer TMS at Camelback Recovery, or actually Camelback Integrated Health and Wellness. We've had great success with it. So we actually have an event that we're going to tonight, and I met you in Salt Lake City a couple months ago at the event. So you were gracious to come out here, and you guys are co-hosting an event with us. So let's get into it. Can you share a little bit about your journey into the mental health field and what inspired your interest into TMS?
Yeah. It's kind of a long, circuitous journey. People who know me well know like I have a lot of variety, and I love learning about new things constantly. And so, I started out as an engineer, and was in my second year of college, and my advisor said, Rich, do you know that you're probably not going to make the grade cut for electrical engineering here at UC San Diego? And I said, what? There's a grade cut? And this was back in the 80s. And
okay.
And so he's like, yeah, you're going to need to figure out what you're going to do. So long story short, I decided to switch in biology. And at the time, I was actually working in a physiology lab doing neurophysiology research. We were actually doing brain stimulation. Okay. At that point, we were using electro to stimulate the central nervous system of a leech, which is very simple. And then we would use a microelectron microscope and take pictures of the neuroplasticity. And I was just fascinated at the time. When I was doing this work, I started out cleaning the leech lab, and then I got involved with actually the dissections and the picture taking. And so that was the first time I realized that the brain is not just a chemical organ, but it's an electrical chemical organ.
Right.
And then again, long story short, I decided to go into medicine. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And I was rotating through psychiatry and was just fascinated again by the mind, the brain, and ways that we can actually help people by innovative brain treatment. So that's kind of how it evolved. My psychiatry training and actually family medicine training both. So the mind-body connection is very important to me. And during that training, again, I realized, help a lot of people with these medications that we're prescribing as psychiatrists, but a lot of people are kind of remission.
Right.
And there's a lot of side effects. And that's when I became, in non-invasive brain stimulation.
Okay. Love that. I too was an engineering major, and I too very quickly realized that engineering was actually civil engineering. I was at UC Davis, and
you were probably too social for the engineering.
Yeah. Over to business very quickly.
That was my problem.
Right. Yeah. I'm not social as an engineer. I mean, being in the lab for hours and hours and hours, computer lab. And so that's interesting. That's really good awareness on your part. And it's like, to kind of are, and there was a path, and it all stems from paying attention and being aware.
Yeah. And things, that's the other thing. I that, people is like, curious and interested in something, will not let you down.
Right. Doors open and doors close. It's like you turn left, and you kind of use a little bit your intuition and attention to kind of body and what your mind is telling you.
Exactly.
As opposed to following the money or following what people tell you that you should do.
Right. What
do you find most rewarding about working with BrainsWay and the leading innovations in TMS therapy?
I think there's a few things. I'm new to the company, although I'm not new to TMS. And I started in September. And I guess it shouldn't have surprised me, but just how much of a family BrainsWay is. It's a very collaborative culture. And I really enjoy from the CEO, 𝐒𝐲𝐬𝐬𝐬, to, I report to is actually Dr. Colleen Hanlon, who started out in TMS research with a particular focus on substance use disorders.
Okay.
So I just learned a ton from her over the last 6 months. With the research team, and I think the big thing that we're focused on at BrainsWay is we don't want to be just known as a TMS manufacturer. Really, we want to transition into a true neuroscience technology company. So this is incredibly exciting for the team. And I think, you see more use cases for TMS outside of depression and anxiety. And you're going to see different platforms. You're going to see our platform broaden, if you will, over the next 5 years. So it's a really exciting time for the organization. And I also am really excited just from a neuroscience point of view. So.
Right. Well, I can tell you that so far we've been really happy with BrainsWay, and even that you guys put on in Salt Lake City, I was really pleased because you guys put on an event for people that already own your TMS machines. And the thinking behind it was like, hey, let's spend money on our providers that are already using our machines so we can get them all together so they can talk about the best practices and they can learn from each other. And based upon that, TMS is going to continue spreading, and the world continue spreading.
Yeah, I think about elevating our communities that we serve, elevating our network of deep TMS providers. And look, none of us sort of the holy terms of treatment. What we brain is modulated by a number of treatments, whether it's, a spiritual, it's a nature intervention, whether it's exercise, whether it's mindfulness. We know that these things work, particularly building community, right? And so TMS is a thing to add to the brain and to our communities, but it certainly is not the holy grail, right? The results are great. There are a number of features that I like about the technology. And I think, going back to Salt Lake City, I felt like it was a community really focused on, how can we learn further? How can we integrate different treatments to modulate different brain circuits, if you will, or networks? And the other thing I liked about the conference is clinicians, non-clinicians all came together, and everybody was really just sort of into the science, felt like kind of nerding out together.
Yes.
And that's what I really loved about it.
I definitely felt not the smartest person in the room there, because there were people there that knew a lot about TMS. So it was a really good learning experience for me. And myself as well. Just listening to business folks. Right.
I'm just fascinated. They develop networks, so to speak, not intended, and also serve the community. It's a community, right?
Yeah. So. And there are so many from people utilizing TMS, and then different things that other providers were doing and ways to utilize, and the way that they're integrating the different therapies. So it was really cool. So let's talk about the science of TMS. So how does TMS differ from traditional mental health treatments like medication or talk therapy?
Yeah. So I just go back to the name. TMS, transcranial. So it's across the cranium or the skull, and it's non-invasive. So we're not opening up the skull. We're not doing a surgery. We're not putting a pacemaker in the chest or in the skull or anything like that. And so we're using a high-powered magnet to induce a small electrical current in the outer part of the brain, the cortex. So transcranial magnetic, the magnet is actually inducing the E field into the cortex stimulation. Really kind of straightforward. It's centuries, of course, for this to develop. Right. And, initially kind of pioneered 1980s, George Alvaro Pascal Leon, who was a neurologist, and Dr. George was out of MUSC. And they really kind of focused on this ring which was the first generation coil, used a figure of 8 coil. And there were some initial studies in depression done, and they focused this coil on the front part of the brain because patients who had strokes had higher rates of depression. When patients have strokes in the front part of the brain, particularly in the left front part of the brain, depression rates are really high. And so noting this neurologist, Alvaro Pascal Leon, and Mark George, who's both a neurologist and a psychiatrist, they did some of the early studies using these, interesting shaped coils, a fake coil, and magnetizing and using electromagnetic to stimulate the front part of the brain. Brainsway developed their technology in conjunction with the NIH, and their coils are what are complex coils. Okay. So they're complex coils. Particularly the H1 coil, which is FDA approved, goes deeper and broader than the figure of 8. So it's kind of a third generation coil. Depression, it actually stimulates bilaterally both sides of the brain, left greater than right, of the frontal cortex. So the front part of the brain, just kind of at the forehead, is focused, this H1 coil. And what we've shown in multiple research studies is that after about 30 to 40 sessions, about 80% of people with depression have a phenomenal result. Right. So 8 out of 10 patients will have a clinically significant change in their depression score. And that's been our experience as well. Yeah. And this has been in small studies, large data sets, and then of course in community health centers like yours as well.
So it seems like there's we're on the third generation right now with Brainsway.
So H1 you could say third generation coil.
And so I would imagine that like generation one, maybe it was to get the coil right spot. And now it seems like it's pretty easy that the coil is on the spot.
Yeah. So part of the particularly the H coils that BrainsWay make, part of what I like about them is that they're flexible and they're not rigid.
Right.
And we encase them in a helmet.
Right. Yep.
It's kind of like a 1950s hairdryer.
Right.
It
Yes.
kind of looks like. And we put that helmet down on the patient's head, and we can snug it up. Coil is so flexible that it kind of fits really nicely and it bounces off. And so this is really helpful. A lot of the other coil designs don't have this feature, and so you actually have missed targets, and that's what I like about the BrainsWay system. And I've used all the systems, and again, all the systems, FDA clearance, FDA approval. But there's are some features, that I really appreciate in the BrainsWay system. Right. In addition to the H1 coil, there's actually 2 additional shaped coils, the H7 and the H4. And just to give a little more, color to this, there's networks, which are basically responsible for 80% of our mental health and addiction conditions. Okay. So 3 brain networks. And wow, BrainsWay has 3 different helmets.
Right.
And each helmet modulates a different network.
Okay.
So we'll get into a little more about that this evening.
Right.
But that just kind of give a broad what differentiates BrainsWay and in terms of its treatments and its broad neuroscience platform.
Now, in the future, I thought I heard somebody talk about this. Are you guys developing a coil that could be like all 3 coils in one, or you can just use a different part of the? So
there is going to be broaden. We are this next generation coil. We're in discussions about a launch, but yes, we do. There is some research with our multi-channel coil, and basically the magnetic field rotates, and this produces a higher of E field.
Okay.
And so you can that. So we've done with this, but we the next is some clinical studies to make sure that there's efficacy.
Right. Yeah. As I'm the conditioner. Like you can use conditioner in one. Right. I mean, they've done it, but it worked. And so is that kind of the same thing here? You can't really do. You could try, but not really.
It depends on the brain, though, and it depends. A guy like me with hairdo, the hair that I have. If you're showing this, viewing this, I am follicularly challenged. but yeah, it's fields, the magnetic overlap, and this stimulates a higher density because perpendicular to the E field, you get neurons discharging. Now, the wonderful thing about it actually is incredibly safe, and it's pretty much good for all of our brains. Right. In other words, when you do repetitive sessions of TMS, you're invariably inducing neuroplasticity. It's a neuroplastic tool, if you will. Right. And there are not systemic side effects. It's so safe. It's actually safer than Tylenol. And there are some of us field that wish it were over the counter. Right. And to be honest with you, I myself have received TMS.
Well, so have I.
Yeah, it's a game changer. And for me, it was like, having a runner's high. When I go out and run, I have clarity, more optimistic. I'm just like, energy after my run. When I get TMS, I feel the same way.
Right. And I feel more flexibility in my thinking.
Correct.
As opposed to being rigid or stuck on a certain way that things need to be. It's just, I find myself to be a little more flexible and a little more okay with just kind of with the flow and not, not needing to be right.
Right. Yeah. No, that's
right.
Yeah.
Right. Can you explain the concept of deep TMS and how it achieves different results compared to standard TMS?
Yeah. So
and that question, because we just filmed a testimonial with one of our past clients who talked about his experience with standard TMS, and he said it was helpful but not as helpful. After doing deep TMS with us, it was a game changer. So
right. So just to the bottom of it, obviously I've already difference in shape. With deep TMS, you are actually stimulating more areas of these networks. When we studies, which really looks at how the brain is metabolizing, right? And so when you stimulate a part of the brain, that metabolism changes, and that's up on a functional MRI image, right? So when we do these studies and we look at what a figure of 8 coil might be doing, which is the most common coil out there. And then when we look at our complex shaped coil, the areas where this E field is just much more broader, much more spread out around the network than with the figure of 8. So you just much miss the network.
Okay.
That's number one. And because of the flexibility of the coil, because if the coil is not flexible and it bounces or it's distant from the cortex, right? So there's space there. It's not going to reach the brain, right? The magnetic field falls off as a function of distance. So if your coil are moving around, it's just like you're going to miss the target. That's number two. And then number three, there's actually been 2 trials, head-to-head trials, where the H1 in particularly outperformed the figure of 8 coil. Okay. So response rates were higher statistically. And so these are some of the that brought me over. In my former practice, we had a number of different TMS devices, trained hundreds of providers on how to do TMS over the last 20 years. But when I left that big practice and started my own smaller practice in my 50s,
right,
bought a BrainsWay TMS system because of this data, because of the science behind it. And I made that purchase actually a year before I became the CMO.
Okay, gotcha.
With their feet, right?
Right, yeah, absolutely. So I'm thinking about, have you guys ever looked at someone's SPECT scan after?
Yeah, so the functional MRI is a similar sort of scan. And yeah, there are a number of studies on the BrainsWay Knowledge Center. And this is a website that's public, and you can find those studies. And what we saw is prior to TMS, the metabolism in the front part of the brain is low.
Okay.
Metabolism. So the rate at which the burning through radioisotope glucose is low. And so there's less yellow or orange color in the front part of the brain. And we'll show a diagram of this tonight. And then after TMS, what we see is that metabolism goes up. Okay. We've also have studies where the dendrites, sort of the connections, go up over time.
Gotcha.
And this is really why I say it's about neuroplasticity. It's about your brain over time. Even if you don't get that 50% response, it's not bad for you.
Right. It's not going to be bad for regardless.
There's no radiation and energy. We've been doing MRIs for years, and there's no associated cancer rates or neurotoxicity or anything like that.
Right.
So,
so speaking of a SPECT scan, so Dr. Mark Anderson with the Amen Clinics is going to be there tonight.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Great.
So that'll be cool. So what are the biological or changes that TMS induces in the brain?
Well, there's just a whole cascade. I think we've talked about them, but some of there's some and so we'll see dopamine levels in different areas of the brain go up. We'll see BDNF, brain-derived factor, which is a marker of dendritic growth, actually promotes brain growth, go up as well. So again, we'll see structural changes, functional changes, as well as changes during and after TMS therapy. And by the way, we see this with exercise as well. Mm-hmm. So, and we see this with psychotherapies as well. So again, TMS belongs with the other pillars of mental health and substance use disorder treatments, right? We can a number of ways, and when we have more tools in our toolbox, the better it is for everybody.
What TMS FDA cleared to treat, and what does the data say about its effectiveness?
These are all great questions again, and I think so. FDA. Just to give a little more context, the FDA will clear certain TMS systems for certain conditions. And what that allows the company's sales and marketing for those indications. Now, to be very specific, BrainsWay actually has more conditions indicated than any other TMS system in the world at this point. And so our H1 coil cleared for major depressive disorder in adults. Mm-hmm. Also, FDA cleared, the only system that's FDA cleared for major depression and anxiety, right? We know that most people aren't just depressed. A lot of us have comorbid anxiety. So that was the second indication. And then a third indication recently added was late life depression, right? So late life depression is when depression hits us, when we're in our 50s and older.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So that's our coil. Our H7 coil is FDA cleared, different shape, different network, is FDA cleared for obsessive compulsive disorder.
Right.
Okay. In addition, many people were using the H7 for OCD, and a lot of the OCD patients also had high depression. And we noticed, hey, the OCD is getting better, but also the depression's getting better.
Right.
So we have an additional indication for major depressive disorder on the H7. Okay. And the final coil, which our salience network. So we have the central executive network, and that's the H1 coil. We have our default mode network, which is a different brain network, and that's our H7 coil. The salience network is where a lot of our, when this kind of gets kilter or dysfunctional, this is where we're over consuming things, right? Maybe a little more to drink, right? We're maybe eating a little chocolate or carbohydrates, or in my case, it's ice cream. Right? That's my go-to, right? And so this overconsumption sort of addiction is a function of the dysfunction of the salience network, and that is so we have an FDA clearance for nicotine dependence with our H4 coil. Effectiveness varies, right? But in general, when we with other treatments, biopsychosocial treatments, medications that are FDA approved for these conditions, anywhere from 60 to 80% of the patients, so 8 out of 10 out of patients will have a phenomenal result, what we call a response, which is typically 50% more reduction in symptoms, and about 40 to 60% will actually get remission. And remission is, it's the holy grail.
Right.
I feel well, work on my recovery, right? And recovery is, return to full function, to grow, right? Spiritually, with our families, with our friends. And we're starting to get back to our communities at that point.
Right. And I can tell you that our experience, even since we've been doing TMS, it's easier to get insurance approval.
Yeah.
And it used to be for treatment depression, and they had to have already tried 4 different types of medications.
Yeah.
And each insurance company is different, but now they're down to like medications.
Right.
And the VA actually, we have an agreement with the VA that anyone that's on the VA insurance has they're pre-approved for 60 sessions of TMS, which is like, and that's just off the cuff.
We are seeing, interesting. TMS originally was cleared with the Neuronetics device back in 2008, October of 2008, and I was one of the early adopters in Northern California. And we worked on insurance coverage. I think our first major pair was like, there was this blue out of Nebraska.
Yeah, right.
The agriculture business is big in California, and we're like, Blue Shield of Nebraska covers this? And we had these agribusiness guys coming into Sacramento with, but that didn't occur in 11. So, 3 to 4 years FDA clearance. And like you said, the payers really, I think, have been a little bit suspicious of this new technology, but now most plans are covering after 2 trials. And so if you don't tolerate the medicine, that counts. And then if you do, but you don't hit remission or don't have a response, that counts as well. And so for depression, like what percentage, or severe depression, what percentage are going to be served by depression antidepressants? Only of us will reach remission with an antidepressant such as a Prozac or a sertraline or Zoloft. And not that we would or not use medicines. Again, it's best to use medicine, psychotherapy, and TMS together so that our outcomes are optimized. But that shows you the eligible population for this therapy is huge, which it should be. It should be getting people in remission, right? Remission is our mission.
Right. And in my experience with remission, it actually is long lasting, meaning the TMS more durable than other modalities.
If we get someone into remission, and again, about 40 to 60% of patients will get into remission, the long-term durability is phenomenal. It's phenomenal. So, and there's not really a treatment similar. We have some innovations in treatments, for example, S-ketamine and ketamine, but these treatments, even if you get remission, they're not as durable.
Right. And I had Colleen Hanlon on my show.
Yeah.
I interviewed her, and we talked a lot about ketamine and TMS and the differences. And it's like ketamine is TMS. It takes a little bit longer, but it's more durable.
Correct.
For example,
Perfect.
Is kind of what we talked about.
Yep.
So, are there patients or conditions TMS is less effective or not recommended? We kind of already talked about this.
The only absolute contraindication is if they have ferromagnetic or metal that is going to respond to magnet. We don't want to heat up. So if I have a implant, like in my inner ear, I want that to heat up, and I don't want that to move or that device to malfunction because I'm ferromagnetic metal in the head. That being said, titanium is not ferromagnetic.
Okay.
So we've treated patients with titanium plates, and so, or titanium X is fine. A patient could have a pin in their chest. That is fine as long as it's about 12 inches from the coil. We're good to go. The device is not going to move or heat up. We're good to go. Conditions which there is not enough support to do TMS, the number of conditions is going down as research with TMS goes up. So for TMS to work, you have to have the appropriate target, right? And so there are different targets. So that target has to be defined for it to work for a mental health condition or an addiction. And then the pulse sequence has to be defined.
When you say, do you mean?
So there are different areas of the brain that we can modulate to affect different brain networks.
Right.
So that's why we have different helmets. That's why we position the different helmets around the head in ways that will treat different things. So the number one condition that I would not treat, because it's just not going to work right now. We don't have a target, and we don't have is bipolar mania.
Okay.
So bipolar mania, not a lot of TMS is going to work for that condition. The second condition that we just don't have, there's two other conditions I can think of: significant and severe autism. Again, TMS, we don't really know them by which autism is occurring. In the severe cases, TMS is not a great solution for that. Those folks. The other, actually, ADHD. And I think this is because we don't have a lot of studies with ADHD, number one. And number two, the stimulants and non-stimulant actually work pretty well if you have ADHD. So those three conditions, I would not use TMS. People say, well, what about psychotic disorders, Dr. B? What about when someone's hearing voices? There's actually some recent research that if we position the coil in more the temporal area, the side part of the brain, and we have a specific pulse sequence, there is some evidence that voice hearing can actually be with TMS. Again, new and encouraging research, okay, for that population of folks who suffer from this condition. So a lot of great research, a lot of conditions, both neurological and psychiatric, that we can use TMS to help. But
regardless, even if one of the other conditions like autism or ADHD or any of the other don't recommend it for, there's still not going to be anything negative that happens, even if they do decide to try out TMS. Correct.
The one thing is a lot of us HD can also have depressive symptoms.
Right.
And for us, where we're in depression, right, the depression is going to affect our cognition. And so TMS will help the depression still, right? So it's not as if you get TMS. Same thing. I could have autism and a high depression and anxiety. And we've helped a lot of people with those symptoms who actually have autism.
Okay.
So
what does the typical TMS look like, and how long does it start? Does it take before you start to see some results?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we have, if I'm a patient, I expect when I come into your clinic for TMS. So the first appointment typically is where we calibrate the coil and we actually position the helmet over them and we get the hand to move. It's actually really cool.
Right.
And that way we know that the power is high enough, but it's not too high. Okay. And then that usually takes to 20 minutes at the most. And then we reposition the helmet for the first treatment. So there are different stimulation protocols, but for depression, for most of the appointments, the average appointment time is about 20 to 30 minutes. By the time you check in, put the helmet on, positioned. So it's about a 30-minute appointment at most clinics. And you can drive to the treatment. You can drive away from the treatment.
Right.
There's no cognitive impairment. Many patients might bring for a family the first treatment, but they see how tolerable it is, how easy it is. Usually by the third or treatment, people are just coming in. They're comfortable talking to the technician or the staff.
Right.
And so, it's most to 30 treatments, 4 to 5 days a week. Mm-hmm. We like to give the break on the weekends.
Okay. Yeah. Right.
And the tapering continuation phase. So most treatment courses and most insurance companies are approving, kind of 35 to. If we look at kind of responders, there's a 20 to 25% of patients will be rapid responders. Mm-hmm. They'll feel the effects after 3 or 4 sessions. Mm-hmm. They'll feel this kind of like brain high and energy. And we call those our rapid responders. They're really fun to treat because, they get it effects early on. The average responder might take 3 to 4 weeks, right, before they get to that 50% improvement at 4 weeks. And then we have some late responders where they're feeling it at kind of sessions. Sometimes for those folks, we can extend the course, of course, for depression, about 8 out of 10 people will get a full response. So we kind of have these 3 groups, right, or average, and then kind of responders.
Now, one of the best that we learned that we started, that we implemented here at our practice was the ITMS or theta burst at the end of a TMS session.
Interesting.
And what we found is it seems to be a little more. To get a free copy of the 12-step guide that I created for you, click on the link in the description below.
Yeah.
And we just kind of added on. We don't. What do you have an opinion on that type of a protocol?
There have been different clinics or healthcare systems have sort of improved on TMS. One, adding more pulses, like you said, and we know this works. The other way I've seen some adding the intermittent theta burst, which is a 3.5 minute protocol.
Right.
So we've seen clinics do that. And I think there is a recent paper out of UCLA which showed that those people who got the intermittent theta burst plus the 10 or 20, which is more the 20-minute protocol, that group did a little better. Okay. So, and then the other thing that's been shown to work, the earlier we get the brain into treatment. Mm-hmm. So, we see people who into treatment within 3 months of getting depressed, they're going to respond a lot easier. The more TMS you do, the more responders you get. So, right. There are definite ways. And there's some ways where there are some actually studies where they've done cognitive behavior therapy with the TMS, and durability improves, and there's responders and remitters as well in these studies. So, there are various ways upon the 8 out of 2 are getting response. Like you guys here are here. So
now I have a friend who wanted to try out TMS. He says, "Yeah, I'll try out like 5 sessions." I mean, is somebody to come and try 5 sessions out? I mean, it seemed like it would be worth the time or the money.
Again,
but maybe it could be. I don't know.
It depends on what they're after and suffering from.
Right.
Any amount of TMS is going to be good for you as long as you don't have that ferromagnetic metal. So assuming he didn't have metal in his head,
right. Yeah.
He can listen to heavy metal while getting TMS. But I always,
I mean, is to see a benefit from it. That's the thing.
Generally not, right? Unless he's in that rapid, if he's depressed and he's in that like ultra rapid responder or he's getting multiple sessions a day, perhaps, right? We have some protocols that are emerging, again, not FDA cleared and needed to be studied, where people are actually coming in for 4 or 5 sessions a day for 5 days. And we're seeing some response in those folks. Yeah. But who like, again, expects to fly away after 5 days. Yeah. The brain doesn't change that quickly.
Right. Right.
So.
Right. Even, well, I mean, with the psychedelics like ketamine, they can change more quickly. TMS, it takes a little bit longer.
Yeah. And again, the durability, right? There's that durability. So I agree with you. There are some IV ketamine trials where we've seen people's go rapidly down. And this is phenomenal, right? Like, if I have suicidality, and I've tried a lot of treatments, ketamine might be the try because the suicidality can be rapidly decreased. That being said, accelerated protocols that we're seeing, at research centers and other centers in the community, we're seeing suicidal ideation decrease of the depressive symptoms. So TMS at some point, particularly with the accelerated protocols, may be used like ketamine is being used at that point.
Now, so you talk about 5 or 6 people doing 5 or 6 sessions a day.
Yes.
I don't think that insurance will cover 5 or 6 sessions. I think that
correct.
they've started covering. They use 1 session a day. Now I think we can get some insurance companies will cover 2 sessions a day.
Correct.
Do you see what's your thought on
I
that?
think if you go on clinicaltrials.gov, where you can follow research, you will see that BrainsWay actually has a trial studying accelerated protocol, and those will be published and in the next 6-7 months. And so, like you said, I think insurance friendly to TMS, and some are already approving 2 sessions a day.
Right.
And so I think it's just better.
Matter of time, right?
I think that to become more efficient, right? I won't have to necessarily, so with some of the companies, you can come in and get your treatment done in 3 to 4 weeks versus 6 to 9 weeks, right? If you're doing 2 sessions a day. Right. So I think that's just going to shrink over time.
Right. Can TMS be used in other treatments such as medication or therapy or psychedelics?
Well, we know for sure that TMS is safe to use in conjunction with ketamine or S-ketamine. There are papers or research that's been published around that. And there may be a signal that's additive. They are working differently to neuroplasticity. We know that TMS is safe to be used with the antidepressants and some of the other agents that we use to treat with depression. And there are a few medications where, and this research came out of UCLA, retrospective, so we have to be cautious, that there might be some medications, particularly Wellbutrin and some of the dopamine drugs, where it actually might boost the rates of response with TMS. Certainly, if we're treating medication plus TMS, psychotherapy plus TMS, the evidence is pretty clear that the response and remission rates are going to be higher than if I'm these treatments as, quote, a monotherapy.
Right.
So integrated treatment that addresses, the spiritual part of ourselves, the social part. It's called the biopsychosocial spiritual model.
Right.
This is the treatment that leads to recovery, as you guys know.
Right. So I got another question about toxic conversations.
Toxic conversations.
So, for example, someone's the recommendation when someone is through ketamine treatment, for example, is like Don't watch negative news the night before. Stay away from toxic conversations, because your brain is essentially plastic going through, or as you're going through one of those types of treatments.
Right.
What's your recommendation on TMS?
There is escaping me the name of the study, but there was a study where it was for patients with going through TMS, and when there was particular types TV shows on the TV versus people just kind of thinking in their heads or worrying, those that were kind of outside of their head watching a light TV show, TMS, that group did better.
Okay.
We believe, Brain's Way, we feel that, the patient experience is, and that, probably as you guys practice here, right? It's good to have a welcoming, calm, safe, secure environment. We don't want our patients feeling anxious,
right.
Because the anxious brain is one with, high cortisol levels, which chronically is not good for your brain. So, and it's certainly not a good environment for neuroplasticity. So agree. And sometimes, we careful about, the news we read, the relationships when to make those changes, incrementally, of course. Yeah. Toxic like the brain.
Right. Okay. Let's talk about, TMS and psychedelics. We already talking about that.
That's right.
So TMS and psychedelics are both emerging treatments for mental health. How do they compare in terms of mechanisms and outcomes?
Yeah, so they both have which is our excitatory neurotransmitter. They both this glutamate system, and not to get too far in the weeds, there are different of this receptor system, and these receptors live on the outside of our neurons, so to speak, and so they're engaging different systems, we think, in how cells talk to each other and how our neurons sort of signal. So again, electrical, chemical. One is a chemical, right, that we're infusing. It's in the blood, easily crosses the blood-brain barrier. And one is obviously electromagnetic. And so their approach is different, but we believe they're complementary. Are they additive? Is a question. Has there been a head-to-head trial? One might say, Dr. B, should I do? Say I've failed to have, ketamine, or should I do TMS? I would say it depends. It depends. And some of that I look at. One is with ketamine, we know that few people are able to kind of taper off the drug. There are some where it's integrated with psychotherapy. There seems to be more people who, when they get psychotherapy plus integrated, there seems to be more people who can taper off the drug. But just sort of head-to-head kind of per number, TMS to be more durable. So I typically, unless they have, significant suicidal ideation or preference, I will have someone do TMS first. It's certainly not a scheduled drug, meaning it's not, TMS is not right. And people be down your doors in the middle of the night.
Right.
TMS.
Right.
So it's not, it's an addictive qualities, and there's not an addiction rate. So, first TMS, if they don't respond to TMS, that's when I start to talk about ketamine, if it's going to be a safe approach for that patient. In terms of psychedelics plus...
You talked about, which, ketamine can be addictive. I'm just talking about TMS. There's really no way you could ever get addicted to TMS. I don't know.
Right. We don't see people withdrawing, right?
I know,
So one
right.
of the core features, at least of a lot of addictions, not all, but some, is the withdrawal syndrome. And we don't see that with TMS. So,
right.
in terms of, have we integrated psychedelics like psilocybin? I mean, in certain areas of the country, there are people who are, quote, microdosing. As a physician who's licensed, we in the 2 states that I practice in, Northern California and Nevada, I can't prescribe, psilocybin. There's really ones you can through a waiver system. That's Colorado. But I know of no research where psilocybin has been sort of integrated into a TMS treatment plan. So
I thought
more to come.
I thought Oregon was at a place where they were able to offer psilocybin.
So my understanding about Oregon, and again, I don't have a lot of Oregon. My understanding in talking to providers up there is they have a waiver system, but the psychedelics are being more wellness rather than psychiatric conditions. And again, as someone with a medical license, unless things have changed, I'm not sure I could qualify.
Gotcha. Okay.
To go through that waiver system. So there's the waters are depending on what state you're in, and who knows what's going to happen. New administration. Not that we need to go down that road, but there's a lot of at both sides of the aisle about how psychedelics should be rolled out, if at all. Mm-hmm. So
well, we shall see.
We shall see. Always interesting.
Yeah, certainly is. I'll be curious to see what happens here over the next couple of years. So I think we probably already answered this question. Here, can TMS and can be complementary? Yes. What are the safety TMS versus ketamine, and how do you address concerns patients may have about either treatment?
Yeah. So I think the difference is ketamine dose, you could have trouble with pressure. Your heart rate could go up. And then there's also, potential for intracranial go up. And so for those who have like a history of an aneurysm or a stroke caused by pressure, we tend to not use ketamine in, particularly if they have a pressure. That being said, if you have high blood pressure and you want to get ketamine, if you get your blood pressure under control, then generally it's fine. Mm-hmm. The other safety concern is obviously, or maybe it's not so obvious, but, as it tends to have more impairment, you start to get into general anesthetic regions. Mm-hmm. So ketamine, it's dosed very low for depression, but with some significant depressed case, we've seen some providers go to more high doses. And when we get to a certain dose, we really don't think worth going higher in terms of efficacy and the safety window, because then you start getting more anesthetic doses.
Right.
So where TMS, really, the more TMS you get, the better. Right, so there's not that safety concern. For TMS, there's 2 things we talk about. One is, can you get an MRI, which means that you don't have any ferromagnetic metal in your head. Mm-hmm. And then the other safety is seizure, which is incredibly rare, by the way. Mm-hmm. Less than 1 in 50,000 treatments, there's a seizure. And so there have some, but no deaths. And generally, if you just turn off the device, what has happened in each case is that the seizure resolves. And in many cases, patients get stabilized in terms of the seizure and come back and respond to TMS. So even if you have epilepsy or have had a seizure in the past, That is not an absolute contraindication of TMS. We just make sure that you're on some good medicine, anti-seizure medicine, anti-epileptics, and make sure that you had a recent seizure.
Understood. How can healthcare providers identify patients who might benefit the most from TMS?
You know, I think when you're not, I think that is taking a step back. The most common thing that I think providers can use to help identify patients who are doing well is actually to do what we call is to incorporate measurements into their care. Mm-hmm. So there are some validated depression instruments that help you measure the level of depression. Right. And some of these instruments, although were created many years ago, like the PHQ-9 or the GAD-7 for anxiety or the Hamilton Depression Rating Scale, these have been around for years. But if you go to your average general psychiatrist or therapist, a lot of us are not using these measures. And so what you see tends to happen is the patient gets started on medication. Maybe they had a partial response. Maybe they're tolerating the medicine, and then they come back to the doctor. The doctor says, "How's everything going? How you doing?" And the patient goes, "Oh, I'm fine, doc." And so the doc refills the medication, and the depressant symptoms aren't measured, aren't explored. Right. And so, you know, what we have is kind of a functional depressed person still suffering. It's like having functional alcoholism, right? Right. The patient is still suffering. Everybody in their life is suffering because, you know, functionally depressed can be around.
Right,
you know?
Right.
So that's the number one thing we can do as a community is to really explore each symptom of depression, whether it's by interview, whether it's in supporting our friends or whatever. And these are available on the web. So, you know, just in terms of our self-care, measuring our depression, just being honest about it. In the last 2 weeks, how often have I felt blue, you know, or sad, right? Just with ourselves and doing those measurements and then sharing those measurements with a professional. I think that will, you know, identify those of us who are suffering. One was interesting. I was on Facebook while I was flying over, and there was this picture of Robin Williams, and there was this quote that some of the most kind of happiest people in the funniest people in the world are actually really depressed. It's a quote from Robin Williams. Right. And, you know, he said, you know, he suffered from depression, yet always trying to make others happy because he felt the suffering of depression personally. And I think for a lot of us, unfortunately, we're suffering silently. You know, we're not using these measures. We're seeing. I mean,
you suppress your depression. If you know, it's like depression, and if you're suppressing, and if you're not opening, I mean, and I think what they're doing often than not is they just find a way to numb. Drugs, alcohol, Facebook. Get into another relationship, whatever.
Exactly. It's avoidance.
They just avoid and they numb and they don't actually feel their feelings.
Correct.
Which, you know, feeling your feelings, you're happy, you're sad, you want to cry, you're in pain, whatever it may be. It's like going through and processing. So I guess how would TMS, I guess that's been this whole interview, but I was going to say, how would TMS help somebody their feelings?
Yeah. Sometimes when we get depressed, cognitively, we're actually paralyzed. Like if you do a cognitive measure, and we see this, you know, with moderate and severe depression, and sometimes what we do, we'll start them on TMS, and we'll start to see the patient respond, and then they like see a little bit of light. They see a little bit of positivity. As you said, the thinking starts to be a little more flexible, and they're more open to therapy, or they're more open to exercise and they're more open to trying to socialize with supportive people. And that's when you see TMS acting like a catalyst, right, for these other treatments and to sort of build brain flexibility, if you will.
Right.
So.
Right. Are there any effects or risks providers and patients should be aware of? I think we already answered that question.
We answered that.
That. Okay. Overcoming barriers. What are about TMS that you encounter most frequently?
I think the biggest one is, when I talk to about TMS or I'm, at a holiday party and ask me what I do, and they're like, wow, there must be some really sick people out there, doc. Or I have patients say, you think I'm that ill? And I'm like, no, TMS is good even if you have mild symptoms. Right. TMS is good even if you are still going to work. So I think a lot of people confuse TMS with electroconvulsive therapy, or shock therapy. And then, so when we start to talk about non-invasive brain stimulation, they're just kind of, everybody's kind of like freaked out. And there was.
They brought that up because one of the doctors that's going to be at the event tonight, I spoke with him on the phone, and he said, "Is this like ECT?"
Right.
So,
yeah, and so TMS is good for your brain. It's good for your mind. It's there's really no overdosing. Cognitive enhancement has been TMS.
Right.
So it's just a healthy thing to do. I mean, there's some of us who believe that, there should be like advice at the schools and, people, go exercise and TMS, and it's just part of the mix.
Right.
So.
Right. And that would be great. I mean, one day.
Yeah.
One day.
Every yoga TMS device.
Right. Right after.
Yeah. It's just be part of the community, right?
Yeah, definitely. So how does BrainsWay address concerns around accessibility, cost, and insurance coverage for TMS?
So BrainsWay has had a very big on reimbursement. Look, most of us want to be able to use our healthcare benefits, right? I mean, most of us would take out our insurance card and pay our copay, and we don't want to pay cash because we're already paying a lot for our premiums monthly. We see this in our monthly checks, right? So it's very important, and BrainsWay takes this we have a big reimbursement arm and working with the payers on access to TMS, reviewing the research with them. And I think one of the reasons they brought me, myself in is I've the Clinical TMS Society's insurance committee probably now for close to 10 years, and sat with all the major payer medical directors, insurance medical directors, and made the case for TMS and more TMS and more TMS and had them grill me. So payer relations, insurance relations is very important. And I think as BrainsWay broadens its platform to other technologies, payer endorsement, payer approval, insurance approval is going to become, obviously more and more very important to BrainsWay, very important for the field in general.
Right. So let's talk about the future of TMS. Are there any exciting new applications of TMS being researched currently?
Yeah, I think what you'll see is, TMS is going to become available in the next year and a half, 2 years. You're going to see applications for adolescents. You're going to see, younger population. Earlier is better.
It used to be 18 to 65, and now
you're seeing coverage go down 15.
Right.
BrainsWay will be, submitting data to the broaden our indication down to 15. So that's a big change next year. We've already talked about the accelerated protocols.
Yep.
We think that these protocols are not only efficient, but we actually think that the response and remission rates are going to be higher. So really excited about that. And then I think, you probably talked about this with Dr. Hanlon. You're going to see broadening expansion into other addictions. Some people question why do you go after addiction?
Right.
And, like who's going to pay for that? To be honest with you, we are working on reimbursement for that, number one. But what I like about the fact that TMS works for nicotine addiction, nicotine is one of the most addictive substances in the world.
Right.
And so if TMS helps that's
pretty good.
It's pretty good.
It's pretty good.
That you're going to see expansion into other addictions. So I can't officially announce what those addictions are, but a good place to follow things is on .gov. So very excited about that. And then I predict that there are to be other ways that we can stimulate the brain, not just with a magnet, but there are technologies that are coming down the pike. So really excited about that. And then I think you're going to see more uses outside of the clinic, like maybe there'll be home TMS someday.
Right. And I think I heard them talking about a home device.
You probably
like
did
as a complement to bigger device.
Yeah, I'm sure you conference,
Right.
and so yes, we're BrainSway is looking at a number of technologies, a number of ways to broaden access. Right, like I think a lot of us want to get some of our treatment outside of the clinic.
Right.
I mean, most of us on a Zoom meeting all the time for our treatment. And I think there is something to coming into a clinic and a brick and mortar treatment.
Right.
But I think there'll be a day when TMS or non-invasive will be done at the clinic. It'll be done at home, at the yoga studio.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. What role do you play in addressing the broader mental health crisis?
I mean, the other thing that's TMS and particularly the BrainSway system is it just, to be a technician, and I see this in your TMS technicians. I mean, they get to stimulate people's brains.
Yep.
They usually are talking during the whole session. So they're doing a lot of coaching. And they don't need a license because it's under supervision from a prescriber, usually a medical doctor, a general psychiatrist, or a psychiatric nurse practitioner prescriber. So this is a great thing. I think it's just been the of professionals. So I think, and it broadens access. There's really a huge shortage of psychiatric prescribers. And I think it's kind of a base treatment. You don't need a psychiatric nurse practitioner in every treatment. Right. That it certainly,
which speaks to the safety of it.
Right. Speaks to the safety and it speaks to, addressing the crisis that we have.
What has been the most surprising or fulfilling outcome you've seen in your work with TMS?
When TMS first got FDA cleared and I bought my first device in late 2009, everybody thought it didn't work. Everybody said, Dr. B, why did you do that? And at the time I was, doing psychotherapy with actually one of the only physicians doing electroconvulsive therapy. That's a form of brain stimulation. And I sometimes scratched my head, like, did I make a big being really an early adopter at that time? And so I doubted the first couple years, and there wasn't any insurance reimbursement. But so the biggest surprise is when I look at the number of research articles that are published worldwide. I mean, it's hundreds since that time, and then some early naysayers, some just phenomenals in the field of psychiatry were against this technology. Now, some of them are some of the greatest proponents of this technology.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to name names because, I just don't do that. It's really nice to see people, I'm glad science that supports this, right? Because we don't want to be administering. Well, we want, truly tried treatments, right? Truly treatments that work better than sham TMS, right? So that's what we want for all of us. We want treatments that work, treatments that have really been against placebo or sham. And I'd say that the biggest surprise is, when I was an early adopter, I was like, I don't know. Should I? Maybe, I remember going to my wife, did I make a big mistake? There's some doubt.
Yeah, well, that's what happens when you're an early adopter.
But now, phenomenal to see the number of lives changed.
I've seen nothing but good. Well, and it's interesting. So you look at like some areas where more people have already heard about, like TMS is already popular, and more TMS clinics all over, like in LA, for example. Yeah. Understanding is there's a ton of TMS clinics. Here in Arizona, there's not a lot of TMS clinics. And I would imagine continuing, people are learning more about it, and more TMS clinics are.
It's nice to see TMS clinics, and it's nice to see as many TMS clinics in LA as there are aesthetics clinics in LA. Maybe not the same amount, but it's kind of neat. Right. And there's actually some clinics in LA who are doing aesthetics as well, by the way, which is kind of interesting, mind-body medicine, right?
Right. Okay. Yeah.
But what's some people say, well, should I do this? Aren't there a lot of clinics? There's still a shortage, even in LA, right? If you think about, just think about depression, ignoring the other conditions like substance use or OCD and anxiety. If you just look at depression, right? About 8 to 10% of the population has depression at any given time, right? And that's a huge population, right?
That's a big number.
Even in LA, there's a shortage of TMS.
Well, it's
clinics.
almost like sort of depression. If you look at depression on a spectrum, a little bit of depression at one point or another.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. I think it's a there are people by temperament. And I think my dad actually was one of these people. Like my dad was always optimistic. Like, to my brother and I, go for it. Yeah. My mom would sometimes like, what? You're encouraging them to be rock stars? Like, what planet are you?
Right.
But, there are some temperaments. The percentage of the population that actually is very optimistic. It's a minority. Most people catastrophize. Most people worry. Most people ruminate at some level. So you're right that a lot of us have, certainly I don't know anybody, when they're being honest with themselves, who haven't had, depressive symptoms or a depressed week. So
Ken, founder of CODA, I remember I was in one of his groups, and he talks about fear being on a spectrum. Yeah. Fear is on a spectrum. The lowest level of fear is concern. So you've got concern, worry, anxiety, panic, terror.
Wow.
And so and then I listen to you, and I'm thinking about depression, and it's like, concern, that's that very low of depression, because I kind of think depression. And as you reach those levels of fear, you're more depressed, which like panic, you're in major disorder, which,
So you might know someone's kind of feeling moody, right? And then blue, sad. Right. And then someone who's really depressed is paralyzed. Like they're not getting out of bed. Right. So, I think you kind of continuum not only for anxiety and concern, but also depression for sure.
Right. Interesting. I was thinking there was another place I was going to go with it, but I forgot I lost my train of thought.
That's okay.
And that's okay.
You get some TMS.
I know, exactly. Does TMS help memory?
It does, particularly working memory. Okay. So working memory. So it does in processing speed, but we don't helps what's called autobiographical memory. Okay. Autobiographical.
What's that?
That's like memories of my childhood, right? Did a round table growing up, right? As a teenager. Yes. Do I have some memories of that? Yes. Did I go to McDonald's or Carl's Jr.? Probably, but I don't have specific audio biography. So if I go get TMS, it's not like I'm going to have like all these.
You're going to remember all these things from your childhood.
Right.
Okay.
I'm in a different way though.
Okay.
Because when our moods change, memories shift as well. our memory shift as well. It says but we put here, you do see if we treat someone in their 50s and maybe they don't have very much depressive symptoms, or maybe they have none, and we treat them like with the H1, so they're bifrontal, there actually can be cognitive enhancement. So better working memory. This is the memory like where we don't lose the train of our thought, right? We remember what we're talking about. When we go from one room to the next, we remember why we did that.
Yeah. I've never forgotten why we got the room.
We're able to word find easier. Our processing speed, our visual spatial capacity all goes up. So the different cognitive factors or subdomains. And so we know that TMS actually helps in terms of age-related memory decline. That's kind of normal for aging. And we also see a signal for mild cognitive impairment, which is actually a clinical diagnosis. And we see improvement in people who have mild dementia. Again, this is all off-label, not FDA cleared, but there are some really that show a signal in these areas.
So can this potentially help with somebody who has Alzheimer's?
Yes.
Or early onset?
For sure.
100%.
Yep. It certainly will not harm the patient. And in clinical studies, we actually see improvement in cognitive measurements, cognitive scales. And there's not systemic side effects.
Right.
It's phenomenal.
Right. So how can people learn more about BrainsWay and TMS therapy?
So BrainsWay has a website, brainsway.com. And I love it because you're going to see some videos. There's actually a video of a patient I treated for OCD on the front page of their website. So it kind of tells their story in their mental health condition and how deep TMS helped them. So you'll see videos, testimonials, and my favorite area, because I kind of like to nerd out, Knowledge Center. And there's clinical research. And that, again, you don't have to go beyond a paywall or anything. It's all right there at brainsway.com. And then also find a provider, right? So if I'm in a certain area of the country and I put in my zip code and I want to find a BrainsWay provider, someone who's part of the BrainsWay network, there's that button there as well.
Right. Or if you're in Arizona, you can go to Camelback Integrated Health.
Camelback Integrated Health.
And we can help you out.
Yep.
So what resources are available finding a qualified TMS practitioner in your area? You already answered that question.
I would say one additional is the Clinical TMS Society.
Okay.
And this is to improve access to TMS therapy. It's a worldwide organization. The majority of the members are in the United States.
Okay. Is there anything I missed? Anything else you think you should talk about?
I think this went well. I mean, I guess the top thing, try to drive home with patients is, you can change your brain a number of ways. It's an electrochemical organ.
Yep. Our brains are plastic.
Right. Our brains are plastic, even when we're in our 50s and 60s.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. And the more TMS, the better.
Okay. Awesome. Well, Dr. Bermudez, thank you so much for having an enlightening conversation with me today. I appreciate you. I appreciate it. And I appreciated learning about the efficacy of TMS alongside ketamine and its role in transforming mental health care. Your insights have been invaluable, and I'm sure our listeners are walking away with a deeper understanding of these innovative treatments. So for those of you that want to learn more about BrainsWay or TMS, go on to brainsway.com, go to camelbackintegratedhealth.com. And as always, I've enjoyed our time. And if you enjoyed and want to subscribe, feel free to hit that like button, subscribe, share this episode with others that you think might benefit, and feel free to leave us a review. Until next time, remember, recovery isn't just about sobriety, about living a life that's fulfilled and filled with purpose and possibility. Until next time. If you got value from this video, if you heard what you needed to hear, be sure to like it. Comment if you've got a question or you have something to say. Subscribe to the channel. Camelback Recovery provides treatment services for people struggling with mental health, mental illness, addiction, alcoholism, whatever it may be. So if you or a loved one is struggling and you need some guidance and you need some direction, reach out to us. Our contact information is down below, or you can go to our website, camelbackrecovery.com, whether it be detox, inpatient treatment, sober living, recovery coaching, sober companion services, whatever it may be. Like I said, we can either help you or make sure that you get sent in the right direction. We help people all over the country, all over the world for that matter. I'll see you on the next video.